Mark Thomas here. I've been a charter member of the COA since we started this whole thing, and this is a little video we're trying to get together here. I started my career out, if you want to call it that, as a hobbyist. Back in 1978, I was working with a friend of mine in a printing plant, and he had built a rifle that found some big intrigue in that for myself, so he took me to a shooting match, and eventually I wanted to build my own rifle, so this happens to be my very first rifle. Built this back in '78 with a Douglas Double X barrel, maple stock. It was a pre-carved stock I got from Jim Johnson's shop in Delaware, Ohio, Golden Age Arms back in the day. Today, this is the latest piece, and some of you folks have seen this gun, but you know, it's a little different than what I was building back in those days and didn't know a thing about building guns. But from building guns, of course, it was a hobby for me when I started. And eventually I lost my job in '93 and had to do something else, and eventually this is where it's led me. So when I first built the rifle, of course, you have to have a powder horn. And it just so happens I still own my very first powder horn. This is a little horn that I got out of my great-grandmother's cellar. And it had a eye screw in here. And I pulled that out, put a flat plug in, put screws in to hold that in, filed up an antler tip for a stopper, inlaid my very first piece of brass in there to cover the hole. Years later, Randy Springer engraved this horn for me, and it's one of my prized possessions. From that, then of course I had to make a few other powder horns and of different configurations, plain, fairly fancy type stuff. And then you get into some turn boxes and things of this nature. Anything out of horn is another thing that I enjoy doing. It's always pushing your envelope of things to do. So from this first rifle, of course, you have to have a patch knife. In those days, we all had patch knives and low slung pouches, and this is my very first knife. The Soligen blade, manufactured blade that everybody got back in those days, and an antler crown that I stuck on it with probably epoxy or something in there. I don't know. It's not pinned. So that was the very first one. From that point, then I've made a few other fixed blades. This has a silver nitrate treatment, since I try to play with some historical oddities. Silver nitrate is a coloring agent that you can use on bone in particular here, and ivory and other sort of things. This is a folder that had the same treatment done on it. Of course, I'm perfecting that a little bit more. This guy here is my rendition from a picture of an original that was sold online, and unfortunately I missed it. The original was about 13 inches long, but this is a close proximity to it. So I made a number of different folding knives and things of that nature. This happens to be one that Scott Somerville had created and wanted to recreate the engraving on it that we could determine from a very, very oxidized piece of, we assume, bronze from the Prince Edward Island region, 1690-1710 period. So all these things have some fun and intrigue to them. So I've made a number of pipe axes over the years, along with many different other things, but this is the latest axe. This is pretty plain. This is an Indian style, if you want to call it that, pipe hawk. The head was forged by Rick Guthrie, and the haft is drilled, not drilled, ash. It's a burned out ash limb that I made the haft out of. So From all these different things that I do, and because I do so many different things, guns, knives, folk art, carving, engraving, many of you know me as a silversmith and things of that nature, so I like the odd things that we don't see in this world of the long rifle culture. So, coconut drinking vessel, you know, that's not typical, but you find coconuts were used quite a bit prior to the 18th century and on through the 18th and the 19th century. You'll find examples. And here's a little silver box that I made up with a cow horn lid. So, you know, all these materials come into the same play. That's why I didn't take a video of doing something just to show you something being done. I thought I would show you the diversity of things that the long rifle culture for me has attacked or attached itself to. For me, and I'm always asked this question, how did you teach yourself or how did you learn this? I look at everything as being relevant. So what I do with a long rifle has relevance to horns, to knives, to axes, to chip carving, to all sorts of different things. And, you know, basically it's the materials that change. The techniques be refined because of the material and how you work that particular material. So I've made things like this, a little wall sconce using chip carving techniques, along with a slight blend of some typical carving techniques. Instead of a chip being 1, 2, 3 cuts and a piece comes out, there's more of a flowing and movement of the carving chisels than just doing chop, chop, and boom. This is another little example of chip carving that I've done. This is kind of the little guy to this big guy that, you know, a lot of people have seen. It's what I call the breadboard, and this is the cheese board. So I've always thought these two pieces along with other things could make a neat little display. And from my engraving, which started off with the rifles and has proceeded into designing my own jewelry and making other objects, of course. But this is a Morgan dollar and this is a buffalo head nickel. So I recarved those into different images as a practice plate as much as anything else, and a more modern style of art form that has been resurged since probably the 60s. And of course it's small, tiny work, but it was the same kind of stuff that's been done through centuries in other societies. We even find coins that were recarved and marked up in Roman times up through Civil War. So there's a collecting community of that kind of stuff. So I find it just another way of keeping in practice hand engraving. And it works for me because I work the coins like it's a miniature canvas, but allows me to work on things that I have no knowledge about when it comes to being trained, like facial features and that sort of things. Being in miniature, it's a bit more difficult because you have to work with subtleties and the finesse of the tools and material. So basically that's who I am. I've been at this for 40 years, professionally now about 25 years, and thank you very much.